And this is the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 2nd chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we have observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out. And there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. The Gospel of the Lord. So did you get a chance to see the Christmas star? You know, just a few days before Christmas, the planets of Jupiter and Saturn kind of came into alignment at the closest point to Earth they had been since the Middle Ages. And together, they formed a bright point in the sky that, from here, looked like a star. And because it was so close to Christmas, there was all of this buzz about, could this, or something like this, have been the thing, the star, that the wise men in today's gospel reading saw? Well, since it only lasted for a couple of hours on a couple of nights, it probably wasn't. Still, I was intrigued enough to want to see it. Now, of course, seeing stars, any stars, in the night sky around here can be pretty difficult because of all the human-generated light. And it was pretty cloudy that week, which seems always to happen whenever I want to see a celestial event. Plus, I need to confess that I am terrible at trying to figure out where stuff is in the sky. I mean, I can make out the Big Dipper and maybe Orion's belt, but that's about it. But this time, I was actually able to see it. It required a little bit of luck, as the clouds weren't too bad in the moment after sunset that I went out to look for it. And though I got to say, even though I had that bit of luck, even if it had been a clear night, I'm pretty sure I would have completely missed it, unless I knew where to look. Because, like I said, I can only really make out the Big Dipper and Orion's belt. I don't know where this is. But I figured I could Google it. So I Googled a map. And it took a lot of things with the phone, because I had to use the compass. It said, you know, you stand in this direction, and this is where it should be. The moon is going to be there. There's going to be a star there, a star there, a star there. And then right there, and I'm like, there it is. But unless somebody helped me figure out where it was that I was supposed to look, I'd have missed it. And I would have missed it unless I was paying attention in the days leading up to the event. You know, the night sky, it's just not all that impressive around here. And around the time that you needed to go out and look was a time that I'm usually inside cooking supper. So I'd probably have missed it if I hadn't paid attention to all of the publicity and frankly, all of the friends who kept posting about, oh, wow, look at this. This is going to be cool. If I hadn't paid attention, I'd have missed it. And I would have missed it unless I actually remembered to make the effort to go outside at the right time. Because after all, that star might have been bright as the day, but if I hadn't decided it was worth getting up off my butt and going outside and looking, I wouldn't have seen it. I'd have missed it. And you know, although art and hymnody romanticize the size and magnificence of this star that the wise men followed, whatever they saw was clearly missed by just about everybody else. After all, the wise men, when they arrived in Jerusalem, asked about a new king because they had seen his star at its rising. And when they do that, absolutely nobody says, "Oh, that's what that really big star is all about." They might have been scared, as King Herod was, about this new king, but nobody else has seen a star. So what was different about these wise men? What made them notice something that others did not? Well, these mysterious guys arrive and vanish quickly in Matthew's story, so we can't really be sure. But it's possible that these wise men also knew where to look. But where they were looking was in their normal, everyday lives. Matthew calls them magoi, from which we get the English word magician. These guys were not probably kings, they were astrologers. They were people who deduced what was going on in their lives by looking at the stars. They were sort of professional horoscope people. The point is, this was their regular job. Every night, they looked at the stars. The night sky was the daily, or more to the point, nightly context of their lives. And while the Old Testament says absolutely nothing about stars heralding the birth of the Messiah, these guys knew nothing about the Messiah or the Old Testament. But they were looking for signs from their gods in their daily context. And so perhaps the real God decided to give them a sign in a place where he knew they were looking. And the wise men saw a sign from God because they were paying attention and looking in a place that was already familiar to them. Maybe what was different about these guys was that they paid attention to what was different or what had changed. You know, when they get to Jerusalem, they do not say, "We saw a bright star," or "a big star." They just said they saw a star. Something that hadn't been there before. A tiny little fleck of light, perhaps. And instead of simply dismissing it as part of the background or just a curious oddity, they paid attention. And they wondered if this was pointing them to something new. If this was maybe something that they should stop and think about. And maybe what was different about these wise men was that they were intrigued enough to go on a long journey to see what this might be all about. I mean, it was interesting enough for them, too, to get up off their butts and do something. They took a long journey, which was quite a bit more audacious than simply going outside for a few minutes before supper. But if they hadn't followed where they saw the star leading them, if they hadn't actually done something, Jesus would have still been there. But they would have missed it. They would have missed out on being part of what God was doing in the world around them. Somehow, they saw and they knew that that thing, whatever it was God's call to action and participation. Maybe that's what made them different. Now, you know, this story about the wise men and the star should also remind us in this season that having an epiphany in our lives, sometimes we use that phrase, "I've had an epiphany in my life." Well, you know what? It's not really about finding a magnificent sign in a mysterious place. Rather, it's about experiencing God's presence right here and right now, often in the ordinary context of our lives. And as with the wise men, for us, that often means knowing where to look. And for us, that probably does not mean reading the horoscope or looking at the stars. Rather, it means focusing on what's happening in the regular places and among the regular people that we ordinarily interact with and encounter. I mean, for the wise men, the stars were the normal places they found themselves. That's just where they always were. And God used that place. And often, in our lives, God is speaking to us through the normal, regular places and the people among whom we live. It's not about finding a mystical, magical place. It's about looking around where we already are. For us, too, having an epiphany is about paying attention to how God may be using a seemingly ordinary thing or event, or even an offhand comment of a friend. You know, I'm not sure that God intentionally created a new cosmic event in the sky just for Jesus' birth. Could have happened, but we don't know. It may be that just in God's normal course of creation, this thing was going to show up anyway. But when it did, God used it to say something to those wise men. And sometimes that can happen in our lives too. It's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened for many of you. You know, like when somebody says something and it feels like, gee, I ought to pay attention to that. Or you see something and it piques your curiosity. Or you hear about something and you feel movement in your heart. And maybe like those wise men, we shouldn't just move on and say, oh, that was kind of curious, interesting. I wonder why I thought of that. Maybe that's God actually saying, hey, hello, pay attention. I'm saying something to you through that thing that was always going to happen anyway or be there, but I'm trying to get you to pay attention to that because I'm trying to show you something. You know, often in the Old Testament, when the prophets hear the word of God, God calls their attention to something or someone that's absolutely ordinary and regular and going on around everybody else, and nobody else notices that there's anything really big about that. But somehow the word of the Lord comes to the prophet and says, hey, what do you see over there? I don't know. I see a bowl of fruit. I see some guys building a wall. Oh, there's a pregnant woman walking by. Normal people, normal events, but somehow in those events and in those people, God says, hey, this is the thing I want to pay attention to because I'm using that thing or that person to call your attention to something bigger and deeper that I'm doing or about to do in the world. And it's by paying attention to those things that are otherwise just kind of small things that God does something in people's lives. And often for us too, having an epiphany is really about being willing to get up and act and explore the thing that you think God might be saying to you in your life, even and especially if you're not sure exactly what it means. I mean, the wise men clearly didn't exactly know what this star was all about. A star must mean about a king. What does that mean, king? It took Herod's religious leaders to put king and Messiah together and think about that. But they got up and they went and they explored so that they could be part of it and understand more deeply. And often, that's the way it is for us. The wise men could have just said, wow, this is a neat thing. How curious, how beautiful. Okay, now back to business that we were in before. But they stopped and they did something new because they felt God's call to act and be part of it. And often, for us too, God is speaking and acting in our lives in order to call us to speak and act so that we can be part of this new thing that God is doing in our lives. And sometimes that just happens in ways that you are not expecting. So I'll tell you a quick Christmas story. Last year, on Christmas Day, we held our usual Christmas Day service. 15 people attended our Christmas Day service, and that included 4 people who were the staff and the minor child of a staff member who had to be here because her mother dragged her along. And afterwards, Pastor Christine and I, we kind of lamented that we were reaching so few people with our Christmas Day service. Was it even worth having again next year? This year, though, since we were all online, we figured, well, we'd do it one more time, and we would stream it at exactly the same hour on Christmas morning. We wondered, truthfully, whether anybody would tune in. There were 57 households viewing our Christmas Day service while we were streaming it, and over 160 viewed it by the end of Christmas Day. For a number of years, there have been lots of us, not just pastors, and not just on Christmas Day, who have been wondering how we can reach more people and connect more people to Jesus as worship and church attendance declines. Yet somehow, in this crazy time of pandemic, God has been showing us a new way. And it is not completely clear to me how we're going to integrate live and online worship when we come out of this, God willing, please, this year. But in the midst of doing our regular work, paying attention to the details of what's been happening, God has been showing us that there are really some new ways, what those ways maybe kind of look like to live and grow and reach new people. It really has been an epiphany. And that is often how God works epiphanies in our lives. And so in this season and throughout the year, look around in your regular life for what's happening. Pay attention to the details that God may be calling your attention to that maybe you weren't there or maybe you didn't notice before. And be willing to explore what those things may mean so that you can grow and become part of whatever it is that is the new thing that God is doing in your life.